it is this. The members of the Commission were not without varied perceptions even among members of the Commission, of each other. When first I spoke in the Commission, outlining my view of the disparities of wealth and poverty in the world, a commissioner, a fellow member, spoke quietly to a staff member, saying that she had not heard a communist speak before. The staff member told her that Sonny Ramphal is regarded as a moderate by most of his colleagues, and was certainly no communist. Who was she? She was Catherine Graham, the owner of the Washington Post, and a sophisticated, modern woman. But such talk as she heard from me was entirely outside her ken. She would discover reality in time, and she would become a valued member of the Commission. But such was the gap in perception outside one's cloistered circle, and it was so in the whole of the world. Catherine Graham and I were to have another interesting encounter while we served on the Commission, although it was one that had nothing to do with the Commission at all. The Commission met in many places around the world. Our fifth full meeting was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. But en route, we had a roundtable discussion in New Delhi in India. On the 19th of November, an agitated K. Graham hailed me on the steps of the Ashoka Hotel where we were staying. Her Washington Post editor had called to tell her of mass suicides at Jonestown in Guyana the day before, and to urge her to make the most of my presence in New Delhi to illumine the story. I was slightly ashamed to tell her that I had never heard of Jonestown or of a cult settlement anywhere in Guyana. I ventured a wild guess that it might be far down in the south near Brazil. I'm not sure what Mrs. Graham told her editor. Jonestown turned out to be in the furthest northwest of the country, near Venezuela. I took comfort later in my ignorance, which, as it turned out, was shared by the vast majority of the people of Guyana, who had no idea that Jonestown even existed, or of the American who formed its bizarre settlement, or of the weird Jim Jones who headed it. Now, a little more seriously. From chapter 24, Mandela's freedom. Margaret Thatcher could barely wait for Mandela's release before proclaiming the lifting of such sanctions as she had imposed, and calling on the international community to do likewise. This, of course, was her deal with the clerk. Mandela was absolutely livid. A few days before the meeting in Abuja, he had said, "Only the unserious and people not involved in the South African quest for freedom would call for the lifting of sanctions now. If sanctions are revived, the government would be encouraged to assert its position on apartheid." The matter was so serious that before leaving Nigeria and the Abuja meeting, I wrote an op-ed piece for the International Herald Tribune, wrote it from Lagos, elaborating Mandela's plea and the conclusion of the Commonwealth Committee of Foreign Ministers, led by Joe Clark at the time, for the easing of sanctions, that the time for easing sanctions had not arrived. The op-ed piece was published in the International Herald Tribune on the 30th of May under the headline, "South Africans Still Need Sanctions." It turned out to be the last published piece from me as Secretary General. At the end of June, I demitted office. 24 years later, on the 3rd of March this year, 3rd of March 2014, I was reminded of the obtuseness of the British and American governments in an address given by the then Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Town, Reverend Desmond Tutu. An address he gave in Westminster Abbey. It was a most splendid and in many ways unique service of thanksgiving for the life and work of Nelson Mandela. Held, as the Dean of Westminster said, in the name of the people of South Africa, of the United Kingdom, and of the Commonwealth. I was privileged to be there in a place of honor with my granddaughter, India Hennessy. Desmond Tutu was characteristically gracious, but he specifically recalled, even in that moment of atonement, the following: what would have happened had Mandela died in prison, as was the intended hope of the upholders of apartheid? I suppose most would have regarded him as no better than a terrorist. Persons in high positions in Britain and the United States did dismiss him as a terrorist. Mercifully for us, said Tutu, and God's world, Mandela did not die in prison. And this is due very largely to the amazing anti-apartheid movement. I use this great pulpit, he said, to say on behalf of our people, thank you, thank you, thank you. I visited 10 Downing Street and the Oval Office in Washington, he continued. My pleas for sanctions fell on deaf ears. Without the anti-apartheid movement, Nelson Mandela would so easily have died in prison. End of Tutu.